This is the time where we're going to have a warm hug of conversations to conduct a SWOT. Leading us into this program, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Jill Ann Fitzsimmons. Warning, she is not a food safety nerd, but she's a social scientist with her whiz bang is resource economics. So oftentimes Jill and I get in a funk of finding the right words so that we understand each other, but our motivations are the same, trying to provide better technical support that builds economic viability for small processors. But we also know that this group is hard to reach, as we already know, so trying to find the right language and better reach. So I'm going to turn the rest of the morning and into the afternoon over to Jill to explain what we're going to do. But if you hadn't heard, she should have already tasked you to be at a certain table, so that we can engage in conversations. So take it away, Jill.
All right, thank you. Have you seen that movie? Has anyone seen Wet Hot American Summer? I feel bad just saying it out loud in a conference. It's a very funny movie, and there's a very funny scene where actually, sorry, this is wrong to here. Here would be good, or there. Yeah. I'll explain why in a second. There's a very funny scene. I have an 8-year-old child, and I think a hallmark characteristic of 8-year-olds is stubbornness. It could be that my child is particularly stubborn, but it's like we get in those like dramatic things of like, I don't want to pick up my coat, kind of thing. So anyway, I was just channeling that for a second. Okay, so my name is Jill Fitzsimmons. I know most of you, or at least a lot of you. And what we want to do today is something called a SWOT analysis. So before I plunge into this, can anyone tell me, just raise your hand if you know about this or have done one of these before? Oh, thank the Lord. Okay, great. Super duper. We thought we were going to have to spend a lot of time explaining. Sounds like we don't. Great. Okay, so before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about the big picture of why we're doing this analysis now, why I'm involved with it. And then we're going to talk about a particular project that Amanda, Annie, Elizabeth, and I are working on right now that comes out of a lot of the conversations that we've had at NECAFs before and a FSOT project that we just finished. And then we're going to do a SWOT in this group. And then before we do that SWOT, I'm going to tell you about the outcomes, but obviously the outcomes will functionally come after the SWOT. Okay, so if you could go ahead. Are you the person who does the slides? Who does the slides? I do the slides? That's right. Oh, God. No, that's fine. I was just noticing that the font is the same as the game Clue, and it's called Q. Yeah, it's complicated. Okay, so here's the big picture. In the fall, we had conversations with a lot of you. What we were trying to accomplish was do basically a sort of analysis of what PC trainings had happened, how people had done in terms of outreach, like if they had been trying to reach out to folks, how successful they were, how they had managed it, what their strategies were. We also wanted to try to figure out what folks were doing, just education about compliance or trying to move people to full compliance, or just trying to get people to file attestations. So what we discovered from this is that there isn't a lot going on, and a lot of what is going on is really siloed. Our initial attempt was to sort of crowdsource it from a regional perspective, so to work with each regional center, but regional centers kind of don't really know. I think you guys have spent some time in the last couple days going back and forth around this and sharing knowledge, and so you probably know more at this point than I do because I haven't been able to attend a lot of those sessions. But the bigger picture there is that it's still a little bit of unclear picture, really, about what's going on. And so instead what I spent some time doing, once we discovered that, one, there wasn't as much going on as we thought there was, and two, it was a little bit disjointed. I went back to the literature to sort of think about why this FSMA PC rule is set up the way it's set up. So when the produce rule came out, for reasons that we could talk about at another time, there was a lot of work put into educating producers about how to implement those rules, right? There's a lot that went into that, and that hasn't happened for PC. So I went back and I tried to sort of do some forensic work, both in the published literature, but also through press releases and statements from the FDA and even USDA programs that have sort of started to crop up to try to understand what that was about. And then, of course, we also did a review of responses to our surveys. We got 12 responses, which is better than nothing. In the end, what happened is Annie went through every FSOP proposal and NEFA proposal that has been funded and identified everybody who said anything about produce, about safety and specialty food or value-added food or anything along those lines. So I think our list was like 40 long. It was very, we cast the net really wide. There are probably a lot of people in there who didn't do anything like what we were looking for, and that's probably why they didn't respond. So we got 12 responses, which is good, better than nothing. Okay, Q. Does it matter where in the room? We did I don't know. I don't remember the names. But no, we did actually. What we did is we went to that and we looked at the trainers who are doing PCQI trainings. A lot of them that are registering that we could find are companies, right? And that's fine. From the database that we saw, yeah, it was mostly companies that were doing, which is totally fine. But they weren't going to fill out our survey about this. They're not really our target. And we'll get there in a second. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. See? We will still use your response. Anybody here who is not so brave as to confess? It's okay. We totally get it. You're here now. If you didn't do it before, and if you still want to do it, we will take that response and it'll get it into our final report, and we will be grateful for it. No, what I said is that when I, an economist, go onto the database of PCQI trainings and I look through who those people are that are giving trainings that I could contact to ask them to fill out a survey, those are companies usually. Yeah. I think we contacted everybody that we could, but this is we can go back to this, Luke, and we will ask you for a list. Okay. Well, so the premise is that we did our best. And we certainly made mistakes. And so if anybody wants to help us fill in the gaps that we missed, we will be glad to take names and to send our survey. And anybody who didn't get a chance to fill it out, we will be glad to take your response. No guilt. Okay. All right, so this big picture, for those of you, everyone at the table, I really had this idea that the business center in this hotel was going to be a business center, but they're not. So I wanted to print out a packet for everyone. Their Xerox machine doesn't work, so now every table has a packet, so you can kind of follow along, but you're going to have to do it on a group basis. The first page of this is the big picture, and what I want to just talk about really quickly is trying to understand how we got to where we are. So pre-FSMA, our food policy was reactive, right? Food safety was reactive. FDA stepped in when something went wrong. So what that meant is that the food producers themselves had to bear the responsibility for implementing anything. And I believe, please be clear, I am being general and I am an economist. So I am sure that there are many things in this that I am not getting down to the details of. But in the context of PC rule, this is what I'm talking about. But stop me if I'm too far off track. So the regulator was responsible for enforcement, right? But they only did that when they were called in to do it, when something was going wrong. So there are really low enforcement costs for the regulator, and that's pretty important for FSMA. But the problem was that there are these unacceptably high rates of illness resulting from foodborne pathogens. And so the government said, this is unacceptable, we're going to change. We're going to go from reactive to proactive. But a couple of things to note is that there was some risk for the producer, and they sort of had to make their own decision about how to minimize their risk. They had to make their own investment. And there are also really high information costs, because one thing that a regulation does is it gives you information about what the rules and guidance are, right? So you don't have to go and find that on your own. So in the absence of that regulation, you have to go and find it on your own, and that can be really expensive, especially for small processors. So then FSMA came along. I say as if it just came along. There was a lot of work that went into putting FSMA into effect. And they moved into this proactive mode. And that changed a lot of the situation. So now food producers are supposed to be taking responsibility for implementing these things. And what's really important, I think, to know is that when you think of like the political conversation that was happening both in the UK and the EU and the United States around the time that FSMA was being implemented, it was this idea of public-private and co-regulation. So this idea that government shouldn't be fully in charge of all of this. It was too expensive, it was too onerous, it was too invasive. And so instead, they were going to try to come up with a series of schemes that were about balancing the public and the private enforcement. And so there's a literature on this in the 90s and the early aughts. And it's really interesting. And a lot of it comes from the UK, where they have a formal policy, and they formally use the word co-regulation. The reason I think this is really important is because we have to understand that there was intent behind the design of having enforcement not have the teeth that it has. That's creating problems now. Okay? Was anyone around? I know many of you were around for that conversation. Is anyone in the room who's around for that conversation have any memory of that? I'm really curious about that. FSMA's moving from to proactive food safety regulation and this idea of private-public regulation or co-regulation. Started with HACCP? Okay. Well, I think we're uncovering evidence of that, right? I think a lot of people knew that at the time, but the conversation in the policy sphere was that it was a good thing. It was going to save everyone money. Okay, so there's still really low enforcement because of this co-regulation private-public scheme. I'm going to use co-regulation because it's easier to say. And then there are lower information costs because now there's published information about the rules that you're supposed to, go by. But, of course, a lot of people don't know that they're supposed to go by these rules. And there's still unclear risks of what happens if you don't comply, right? Like, nobody really knows if the government at some point is going to start taking up compliance and do something about this. And we actually also still don't know if it's done much to lower the rates of illness to a level that's acceptable, right? We don't have a lot of information about that yet. And I don't think we could at this point. It's probably too soon. But it is, given that was one of the drivers of this, that would be an interesting thing to think about. Okay, so the question that we have here is FSMA working as intended? And the reason I want to start with this conversation before our SWOT analysis is because I think my take on this, from reading the literature, from sort of spending time in this space, from thinking about the way that social scientists understand risk and cost and trade-off and enforcement and regulation. I think that what's happening from the big picture is that this is working as intended and it isn't what you want. And that's different, right? Like when Amanda asks Glenn yesterday, can you share this information? And Glenn's a little bit like, right? Or something. I don't think he has any ill intent there, but I think from his perspective, that he's doing what he's supposed to do, right? And it isn't that they're trying to withhold information or make your lives harder or do anything like that, but they have a regulation, and it's their job to enforce it. And the regulation is doing something that it was designed to do, and I think it might be a little confusing that it isn't working out for people on the ground. Okay? So that's the big picture that I want to sort of start from. Does anyone want to hack at that? Yes, ma'am.
The regulation was written with a lot of input from manufacturers, the big manufacturers, not the small manufacturers.
That's a really good point. That's very well taken. Yeah.
I think it's too early to tell if it's working as intended because, COVID disrupted everything, so you kind of have to throw those 2 years away. It takes time for it to trickle down. So there's still a lot of small manufacturers out there that don't know about the regulation. It's not the regulation's fault. So I think time will tell if it's working or not.
Let's do two more, and then we're going to move on, and we're going to have a lot of time to have conversation in
So another issue may be the fact that the ORA, the Office of Regulatory Affairs that Glenn works for, is different from FDA CIFSAN. So ORA is doing everything from like pacemakers to like saline bags to everything. So it's kind of hard for him to pull out just the food stuff. And then they don't interact with CIFSAN as much. So that's a bit of an issue. He can give reports, but like his scope is quite broad.
Let me, will you put a pin in that? Because there's something I want to say to that. Would you remind me before? Thank you.
Just kind of following up on Wendy's comment, and we see that on HACCP on the long-term impact, right? So for meat and poultry HACCP, which is most of what I do, besides preventive controls, it took 25 years right after the regulation was implemented and enforced to see reductions in foodborne illnesses, particularly Salmonella and Campylobacter infections, right? So I think it's just going to take a really long time.
Hopefully not 25 years. Okay, so the thing that Andrea was saying, I think, pulls into something that there is a, I don't know if folks saw this, and I wish if I was going to print some out, but again, Xerox machine. There's a recent external panel of reviewers on FDA. So you guys, I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. If you dig into, does anyone not know what I'm talking about? So recently there was an agency that was charged with conducting an external review on FDA's performance. And it looked specifically at a number of things, but one of the things it looked at was the PC rule and the relationship of how FDA is performing with respect to the rule and its implementation. And there were a number of really interesting short-term and long-term recommendations that were made, including new regulatory powers to fine, to track, to enforce, which I thought was really fascinating. And to Andrea's point, reorganization, internal reorganization, to try to do a better job of making sure that the people in charge know what's happening and things are separated out in a way. So we'll talk about that a little more in a second. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so the evaluation was just doing FDA CIFSAN, which is the science building, Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, and Glenn Bass works for the Office of Regulatory Affairs. So CIFSAN doesn't interact with a lot of people as extensively, which is, so CIFSAN's got the problems. ORA they're just the cops.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, was there someone else over here? Did you want to add to that? Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear it. What?
That's what I was trying to figure out.
Okay, good. All right, so let's move from that big picture to this new FSOP project that I mentioned. The goal here is to engage small and medium producers. And ultimately, what we want to do, I'm going to use Amanda's term. I like it. I feel like in this room you can handle it. Some people can't handle it. Is try to enact a paradigm shift about the way that we identify and reach out to our target audience. Now, one of the things in this packet, again, is a couple of definitions that don't fit on the slide. Just very quickly, at this moment, we are not going to make an attempt to formally define SMPs, but I think we vaguely know who we're talking about, small and medium producers, right? So if you can just go on faith with me on that one for this activity, I would appreciate it. So we also have a definition of qualified exempt facilities, right? That's FDA's definition. And we all know what that is. And then the SWOT analysis, which for those of you who did not raise your hand, I feel like everybody raised their hand. It was awesome. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Okay, those are just I'm just defining some acronyms, and it's in the packet if you don't remember or you don't already know those things. All right, so the objective of the project overall, the long term, is to increase the number of processors that file attestations with the FDA. Very, very, very specific, right? And again, kind of to this point that, is it Byron or Brian? I'm sorry, Byron made. We're not going to know for a long time if we're effective or not, but that's our long-term goal. So the challenge that we identified that we want to address in this project is understanding what motivates them to comply. What is it that motivates them? And obviously, that's skipping a whole bunch of steps involving, like, finding them, right? And so we want to measure it through the rate of processors filing attestations. What we're doing here is we have this sort of three-part process to this project. And the first part is identifying factors that support or prevent qualified exempt processors from engaging with the education. The next part is to use those factors and behavioral methods in social science, and I will come back to another NECAS and talk about that more with you when we are doing that. And then finally, we're going to use that, and we're going to try to do Amanda's paradigm shift, which I think we're going to be good at, and we're going to start trying to find these people where they're at, and we'll, again, talk about that when we get to it. Okay, so what we're doing today is trying to engage all of you in this first thing, and it's also going to help you, I think, in the long run, and you'll see why in a minute. Oh, what do I do with my little green? Well, I have to find the thing first. Okay, so our research question is, how do food safety educators increase the number of processors that file attestations? What is a SWOT analysis? Anybody here who raised their hand want to say this? No? You guys are so eager. Yeah, Dave. I love it.
You want me to read it or just?
No, tell me what you think it is. Or I mean, you can read it if you want.
Sure. Well, that's a great job up there, too. So this is an opportunity for us to take a look at ways to improve, but at the same time do some analysis on current procedures and processes that we have going on right now. But seeing what's happening in the marketplace, understanding what some of typically the competitors, obviously that's one of the areas that this would be looking at. So that could be other people in the marketplace who are also providing the same type of course, and also looking at areas in which that can jeopardize the program as well.
Okay, that's excellent. So here's a little bit of a variation on the theme. So what David said is 100% right, and for those of you who have done this in a company or an internal organization, that's exactly what you do. This is not, you guys don't all work for a company, right? You're a community of food safety folks. You include educators, consultants. I don't know if there are any regulators in the room or not, but you're more, you're not like a unit of a business that's trying to understand the competitive landscape necessarily. But instead, what we're trying to do here is think of you as the food safety educator community. Now, those of you who are not technically in the educator community, you might be consultants or something else. We're still asking for your input on this, but we're thinking of this from the perspective of the group that we are is the food safety educator community. All right? So what is it that we have as strengths? What is it that we have as weaknesses? What are the opportunities to us? What are the threats to us? And what we want to do is accomplish this goal of identifying a strategic path for the community to engage SMPs at QAFs. Look at all the definitions. That's why I tossed them in earlier. To file these attestations. All right, so that's our goal. So the unit that we're operating as are food safety educators. And what we want to do is increase the number of people to file attestations. And what we want to do is try to figure out what is it that we're good at that helps us do that? What is it internally that we struggle with? What is it outside of us that helps us do that? It kind of gives us leverage there. And what is it that prevents us that we don't necessarily have control over? Okay? Yeah.
I just want to kind of point a clarity of an indicator here. So to the point that Byron was saying earlier, we won't really know for years about all these things, but as a measurable indicator, the reach here is, well, based on the stats that Glenn Bass has shared in the past, that we have a large number of identified facilities that we are pretty darn sure are exempt from the rule, but the number of attestations filed is really low, and Annie has done an analysis with our region in particular, and we know if we bet our bottom dollar, there's a lot more qualified exempt facilities, but they haven't filed, which would suggest that they're not filing because they don't know. And so I just want to, for the sake of clarity, reiterate that we're not hell-bent of like, yes, get exempt, get out of jail card here. That's not the take-home message, but the idea of having the metric of a qualified exemption, if we can hit that, then it would suggest that if they were aware, they would file, just for a point of clarity.
Yeah, thank you. That's priority. Okay, so I'm going to back up one slide. Just to remind us all, the internal factors are strengths and weaknesses, and the external factors are opportunities and threats, okay? Since so many hands went up, I'm not going to harp on this very much. But it's one thing that's going to happen as we go through this activity is that we're going to identify something, and then we're going to say, oh, well, where does it go? And somebody's going to say, oh, well, that's a weakness. And then someone else is going to say, no, that's a threat. And I think that's an opportunity, right? So the point is that it doesn't have to go in just one, but the aspect that each SWOT area has that connects to it, it should be listed as such under that area. I did not say that right. Did that make any sense to anyone? So if you have something that people are seeing from different perspectives, that just means you need to tease it apart, right, and put the parts in the right category. That was a better way to say it. Okay. All right. So the one last thing, I do not know if I put this. So what I'm going to do right here before we dive into this actual practice is to talk about what the outcomes will be. So the first thing is that we're going to synthesize that lit review that went into that sort of first slide we talked about, the surveys that everyone's going to go and fill out now. So we're going to get like 50 responses. Probably not. And then whatever we come up with here in this conversation, I'm going to put them into a document. It's going to be an internal document for now, and then we may see if we want to send it out into the world in some formal way. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that synthesized learning, and we'd like to take it back to actual processors and see what they think about it from their perspective, from their experience. And I suspect that, and we'll be asking you to help us identify those people because we would like to have them come from more than just one small area. So to the extent that we can get representation from a larger geographic range and products and all that would be really great. But we'd like to make sure that we just sort of have a gut check, right? What if their experience is close to what we think it is, that's great, but they may have some other insights about what it is that prevented them or is preventing people like them from moving through this process. And we'd like to know about that. So we'll be asking for your help with that. And then we'll pull it all together. We'll conduct the social sciences research. We're going to use that research to test our results. And again, that's within this project, and we'll talk about it later. But we'll also be giving you these documents. And I think that we have found that these outputs from these sessions are incredibly useful for substantiating funding requests and to try to understand and define future research projects or extension and training projects. So, to the extent I'm hopeful that it will be helpful for all of you to do that. All right. So, with that, friend in the back table. Hi. Can I ask you to move to one of the other 4 tables because it's a group activity? Okay, so here's how we're going to do it. We have some amazing volunteers. We have Mina. We have Yuzhen. Did I say it right? Yeah. Okay. We have Annie. You guys all know Annie. At the back table, oh my goodness. Not that table. Sorry. I know, I was really unclear about that. Sorry, why don't you guys... So we have Christina. We have Julia. Pavana. Rabia. Sorry, I never actually saw your name written down. That's what I need to come up close and look at your name tag. Okay, so this is how we're going to do it. We have 4 charts out here. We have our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We're going to do this category by category. So first we're going to talk about strengths. Then we're going to talk about weaknesses. Then we're going to have lunch. Then we're going to talk about opportunities. Then we're going to talk about threats. Then we're going to pull it all together. Within each category, first, we're going to have small group sessions at your table where you guys are talking about it, breakout, etc. And then we're going to do a report back where table by table, you guys report back what the strengths are that you found, right? And then we'll move on to the weaknesses. Christina is our note-taker scribe, so she is going to be feverishly typing while we're doing the large group report backs. And she's also going to be rotating around with me and Annie, and I guess probably Yuzhen, to the tables during the small group sessions. Now, the way we're going to start the small group sessions is I am just going to let you start. We're going to start with strengths. I'm just going to see what you guys come up with. If you feel stuck, we have prompts for you. So if you, as a table, you're like, I don't know anymore. You want to come up with a list of strengths, a list of everything. If you feel totally stuck, raise your hand. Christina is the holder of the prompts. She will come around and give your table a prompt, right? Hopefully that will spur some conversation. And then we will go to the large group report back, and we will have our scribes, and we will have each scribe up there all the time. Because like I said before, one person says it's a strength, and another person says, no, it's a weakness. So we're going to try to go category by category, but we recognize that probably in the report back there might be some bouncing around. All right? Does that seem relatively clear process-wise to folks? Okay. Are you ready? All right, so everyone sit at your table and try to come up with a list of what you think the food safety educator community's strengths are when it comes to getting the SMPs to file attestations. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to do our report back. So is anyone here in this room familiar with the concept of taking stack in a group conversation? I'm so fascinated by this. So this phrase, taking stack, is something that I've used a million times in my life, and nobody in this conference seems to have any idea what I'm talking about. So when you have a large group conversation, often what happens is someone raises their hand, and everyone else is talking, and someone is, usually the facilitator, is trying to keep track of everyone who's raised their hand, and then they don't, and then someone goes before another person, someone gets frustrated, it takes you too long because so many people want to talk, you forget what you were going to say. So a person who takes stack is a person who's designated in a group conversation to watch when someone raises their hand to talk, to make eye contact with that person and acknowledge that that person has raised their hand. Then the person can put their hand down. And then the person who's taking stack can tell the facilitator who's next, right? So it kind of reduces fatigue and hopefully mistakes. So Annie is going to take stack, and she's also the guarder of the random roaming mic. And we're going to ask each table to start thinking about how to report back strengths. We're just going to do it one by one. All of our note takers go up for we're going to do this on the wall charts. Can't see them, but we still want them on the wall charts so that you guys can peruse what everybody else has reported. So Mina and Rabia and Pavana and, oh my gosh, Julia, if you guys could go up and be the ones to start to write on the sheets, okay? So go ahead and go up now, because we're going to start. And I know that you guys are also taking notes, so you're going to have to pass your notes off to people, or folks in the group are going to have to try to remember. So we have about 10 minutes to do this, and then we're going to do our small group breakout for weaknesses, and then we're going to break for lunch, and then we're going to come back, and that's because we started late, because the last session went a little late, okay? So we're going to try to keep this pretty quick, pretty rapid fire. That isn't to say we can't talk about anything, but let's first go around and start with Kate. Do you want to start? Do you want to just read off a few of the strengths you guys came up with in your group? Yeah, Kate Menifee. You're making eye contact, so that was a mistake you made, in case you're wondering for future reference. I pressed mute. Okay. Oh, you're in the way. All right, let's see. I don't know if this is... get my suitcase and my deodorant. Okay, you have to go over here. Oh.
Okay, well, okay. People from my table jump in, because I'm only, I think, going to remember a couple. We talked about a lot of things. Light is blinding.
If you come up with weaknesses, folks will take notes there too.
Okay.
Mina, are you ready? Okay. Do you have your marker? Yeah. Great. Okay.
Something really important to share. I think, so one of the big things we talked about was strong collaborations amongst educators, amongst ourselves, people who are supporting food entrepreneurs. So strong collaborations amongst each other. What else did we talk about? We talked about entrepreneurs liking having a trusted relationship with some kind of advisor or educator, as sort of a who isn't a regulator, to kind of bridge that gap, so they have the space and they can feel comfortable to ask a question that's not going to like lead to an inspection. We talked about something I mentioned was people really like a template. So they can like look like, what does a food safety plan look like, or an example, even a template or an example. What does a recall plan look at? Sort of just some examples of what I mean. What else did we talk about?
Do you want to pass it off to Amanda while you guys think of some other ones? Amanda, here you are, because you're sitting close.
Me? All right.
You're sitting close
I'm going to
enough
need
to read.
notes. I'll need the notes.
And if you guys came up with something that somebody already said, then just repeat it, and then Mina and other scribes just put a star next to it.
All right. Let's see. Some strengths. We also echoed the collaborative spirit among the food safety educator community. We talked about the efforts to try to have regional diversity within the Northeast for processor, in particular, of regional diversity, as well as the expertise here. We think there's an opportunity also for including other entities, like buyers was one example. But
You can put that in opportunity.
Yep. But in terms of the NECAF's educating group, of trying to be mindful of who comes to the table. So as an example, in this group right here, we have some industry folks. We have technical support, consultants, labs, and educators, which is kind of an example of thinking about those different partnerships to get a better reach. Established, accessible content. So as someone had described, sometimes it's a little bit shock and awe of, oh my gosh, there's lots of information here, but so it can be a little bit overwhelming. The actual efforts and enthusiasm to share the information is a strong strength that this group discussed. Also thinking about the group kind of discussed the willingness to identify new approaches to enhance learning, whether that be, as example, the resource tool or modalities, or providing new opportunities to have conversations for engagements for improving practice with the clients that we're working with. The passion of the educator group was something we joked and praised, because as some folks, as food safety is not something that everyone is excited about, but a lot of the educators here actually have enthusiasm for it, which kind of helps increase interest or engagement along the way with our educating program. There's a note here, I don't remember, used as backbone for businesses. I don't know what that one was. It's funny for me to read somebody else's notes because it's not how I would write it. We talked about motivations, what motivates us as a group, and so thinking about the strengths of when we provide training or provide educational tools that gives our clients confidence, it gives us stronger motivations to try to enhance access and reach to that group, and that was something that we all had agreed on, and thinking about sharing our stories and experiences of problem solving and troubleshooting helps with engagements and promote motivation.
All right, so next table, sorry, Amanda, but that was very... I did. I know, but I wanted bullet points for 10, and you were giving me novels. Okay, next table. Somebody's going to have to... Oh, is it working now? Yep. Oh, super. So somebody at the next table, go ahead. We have to do it pretty quick. Bullet points.
Yeah, we have Pavana's notes. Pavana can... Okay.
So we educators have impactful data to give to our sponsors, right? It could be a strength. impactful data to give to our sponsors. And legitimacy of educators. Trained educators.
These are beautiful bullet points. Good job, Pavana.
And we have support for training, grants, resources. Yeah. And I think Amanda already mentioned we have passion and desire to work. An established network. And we have relationship with research community as well, the scientist. And we could be a resource for regulators.
I would put that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
If you are a resource for regulators right now, that's a strength. But if you could be
a resource for regulators, opportunity.
It could be both.
And we educators critically think and make risk-based assessments. We educators think critically and for risk-based assessments.
So our approach is risk-based as an educator.
Sometimes it could be a weakness as well. We overcomplicate it.
That's a really good. I'm trying to think of how to make that into a bullet. So you come from as an educator, not just as an evaluator of food safety risks, but as an educator, you're thinking from a risk perspective. Is that what you're saying? A science-based education perspective. I like that. That's right. That's great. But it could become a weakness at times if left unchecked. Okay, so first of all, we're going to, because of the timing crunch, I said this before, just to repeat, we're going to move into the small group conversations about weaknesses. This is one of the most important conversations, so I'm sad that it's kind of right before lunch. But now that you kind of have the strengths under your belt, let me just say, first of all, I'm going to put the mic down because I think you all deserve a round of applause for all those strengths. Yeah. Okay, so remember that the weaknesses, we have prompts. I think we're going to do them a little earlier this time to make it move a little faster. But these are things that are internal to the community, right? So these are things that are challenges that internally you guys have as a community. Potentially they're solvable. In fact, they probably almost all are solvable. And there are reasons why they haven't been solved. So it isn't a blame situation, right? This isn't like, oh, you haven't done this thing, it's terrible. It's just identifying what they are to move through how we can approach, prioritize and approach how to address them in the future, all right? So we're going to do this for 9 minutes, hopefully 10 if you guys are willing to stay that extra minute, and then we're going to break for lunch. And we'll do report back after lunch. Sound good? Okay, folks, our session started late, and we have to wrap it up because we don't have that much flex on the back end, and we lost 15 minutes. So let's go back. We're going to spend the next 5 minutes going back to weaknesses. And I just want to remind everyone that weaknesses are hard because it's sort of a little bit of self-reflection, and it can be hard to sort of have that conversation at a table of colleagues. But if you think of the things that sometimes you wish you knew but don't, or relationships with people that you lean on, that maybe it would be good for you to know some of what they know, and there's like a way to do like a public relations training or something, some sort of skill set that isn't part of your skill set, but that could be useful, that you find is challenging when you go to do your work. So you might want to think of it in those terms, right? So let's do 5 more minutes on this, and then we're going to do our report back. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move into our report back. If we could have our students that are helping go to the back. Let's start with this back table here. Andrea, do you want to report out? So bullet points. Bullet points. Short, 5 words or fewer.
All right. Risk-based language is hard to communicate to lay people. Time and also money.
Okay, so actually I'm going to pause right there. So it is hard, but what is the weakness? Frame it as a weakness.
Let's see. The sort of the language that we need to use for the training is often too advanced, but we still need to communicate that accurately.
So that's about the language,
yeah.
Right? And the weakness is about the internal weakness. So I'm going to take a stab at it. Mm-hmm. We have a hard time finding language that our target audience understands.
Yes.
Okay? Do you guys understand the flip there? Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry for using you as your...
Time and money,
okay.
Especially since we're limited on time. And so if we need to study what the processors are working on in order to give them more accurate information, that can be a real bandwidth issue. Mm-hmm. It is difficult to teach hazard analysis. High turnover. Outcomes are not clearly communicated to a lot of the course takers.
So hold on. So you're saying that as the trainers, you have a hard time communicating what are the outcomes?
Desired outcomes.
Okay. All right.
Let's see. The time available for giving the training can be too condensed. Mm-hmm. For some of us, our work experience is more limited than our technical and theoretical knowledge. Mm-hmm. And then we have like an institutional memory issue where occasionally we almost try to keep people from retiring because we'll lose their knowledge because it's not being distributed.
Okay. So you don't have the time to document what you're doing for future folks. Okay, awesome. Do you want to pass the mic over to the table next to you?
Thanks. So we identified a number of weaknesses. One of them we talked about earlier. As educators, sometimes we tend to overcomplicate training. So maybe to the point that Andrea just brought up, we could simplify the language sometimes for the trainings. Relatability and lack of maybe some practical or industry experience that most of us, I'm a college professor, I've never worked in a food facility, I do my best to answer questions, but maybe we lack some of that practical experience. We talked a little bit about territorialism and siloing, and we would have to get back to that point unless somebody else wants to explain. We talked as a weakness, academic ego, and maybe lack of active listening, lack of communication with policymakers, lack of awareness, or let me see. This is not bragging enough, or maybe not having the right tools to brand or market ourselves as extension specialists in our programs, and then that we have overextended efforts that comes to the point of us doing research, teaching, extension. So
awesome. All right, why don't you pass it to Kathy? We've already designated her as the bullet point maker.
What do you need clarification on?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, I think some of these may be different ways of saying the same things that you guys have said, but we had limited availability of technical services, which is what we meant by turnover and shortage of staff and people not staying in food safety or not going into education side of food safety. We had strong local sort of food system focus means that we produce duplicate work. And that's what we meant by Yeah. Yeah. I was also thinking that there's the state knowledge versus if, like as a consultant, I work across different jurisdictions. But then I find when I'm talking to people within one state, they only understand their local jurisdiction.
I think that's really, for the Northeast in particular, that's really, really important, especially when you start thinking about how USDA is defining qualified exempt and selling across state lines.
And then food safety is not a part of business planning, and that we're not talking to the Small Business Association or the equivalent to get that to be part of the process. We had the vocabulary issue where people don't know what they don't know, and we assume we make assumptions of what they need without trying to understand what they need. We also called that the lack of assessment of their entry point, because they'll come and say, and then I put my last bullet was everything's called HACCP. So they'll come and say I need a HACCP where they don't always need a HACCP plan. So.
Okay, that's really great. So we're going to move on to opportunities. When we move on to opportunities, I just want when I was pushing Andrea a little in the beginning, a lot of these are reported as, I think the way they're reported is sort of like these are vague and ambiguous other things that are happening to us. And it really is important to think of the weaknesses as the things that you have control over, and there are really good reasons why they haven't been addressed, right? It's not to say that it's bad that they haven't been addressed, but they're things within your ability to control if circumstances change, right? So I think as we're moving through, even though this isn't exactly how we reported it out, if you can try to think of weaknesses a little more in that vein, it's going to help us later on. So let's go ahead and move to opportunities, right? Okay, where are we? And we're going to do this one a little faster because we don't have so much time, but also because now you have a lot more practice, all right? So I'm going to calculate how much time it's going to take, but I haven't done it yet. Okay, so Luke, where are you going? I was going to ask you to report it. So someone else from that table, can you guys please start on the opportunities?
Thanks. Okay, so we identified a number of opportunities for educators. One of them
is... Let's all listen to Byron.
Everybody listen to me?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we identified this, things like alternate funding streams, right? So working with non-traditional or establishing non-traditional relationships for funding, such as commodity boards, expanding partnerships and collaborations with industry and local government, things like small business administration, hubs, chamber of commerce, advisory boards, county extension agents. So maybe some non-traditional, connections. Of course, get more money from extension if you work at a university, but that's somewhat unrealistic. Incorporate extension activities into academic programs. We see that as an opportunity to attract people to work in extension and to develop capacity. Shared marketing and resources, cross-promotional events, for example, working with occupational safety, food safety, other things, right? So we can cross-pollinate and cross-promote. That's all we have.
Great, thank you. All right, so Kathy, you want to...
Oh, Robbie, what was
Oh, sorry.
All right, sounds like we got it.
Our opportunities were better leverage organizational partners and resources, so like the SBA and things like that, and use existing resources as well that are available. Consistent measuring / platforms of expectations, so harmonizing the message, so that if someone phones me up or phones Tricia up or phones Amanda up, they get the same "you need GMPs" message kind of thing. Market-based incentives for food safety education, and use existing resources use them as Lego blocks to develop new modalities of resources. Foster more peer-to-peer learning in the space of food safety education. Utilizing past experience stories for new training. So when we're training, I'm into stories at the moment, but using the stories we've had with former clients to help new clients understand why they need what they need to know. And then expanding and integrating into adjacent subjects such as business planning and that kind of marketing and that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. All right.
Who wants to? Okay. Thank you.
All right.
So for the alley-oop, the FDA external review from the Reagan-Udall Foundation and the opportunities for change listed for the FDA itself. Social media is another opportunity. Trying to access some of the funding that's typically given to farms. As Ellen pointed out, states get more money based on how many farms they have registered. So if we can try to get more farms registered, that can get them more money as well. Scare tactics, if necessary. Processors increase comfort interacting with educators rather than regulators. Greater information exchange. Increased referrals for other experts. Making food safety part of the business plan for either greater profitability or greater sustainability, because discarded food is not sustainable. And I think that's it.
That's great. I've never seen anyone make a threat be an opportunity. So good job. That was pretty meta, pretty nice. Good job. Okay, I'm going to add a couple. So the economics literature in the last 2 years has started to identify the lack of data collection around cottage food industry. Small and medium processors is what you call them. Cottage food industry is what economists call them. And they've started to advocate for some federal agency to actually start doing a better job of tracking those businesses and having data that people have access to. So that's an opportunity to tack on to that conversation. Amanda, you didn't put this on your bullet point, but it's in our grant, so you thought of it already. There are all these specialty food associations, all these expos, all these events that happen where these people are that we are not going to. So those are huge opportunities for folks to find people. La, 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 la. Okay, anyway, I just wanted to point it out because I think it was a really brilliant idea and worth everybody paying attention to. I think another opportunity is something that Jody in particular said yesterday, and I think an opportunity that Amanda took yesterday, which is that when there are opportunities to influence the conversation at the federal level with NIFA and with the FDA, when FSOP grants, when all NIFA grants, all the RFAs are released, there's usually a period before then when they take comment about what should be included. Right? They're open to expanding those RFAs. And so to the extent that you guys are able to leverage your relationships with them to say, hey, this is a need that we have. It isn't explicitly covered in an FSOP RFA, but it should be because of this, that, and the other thing. That's an opportunity, right? That happens all the time in sociology and econ. We do it all the time. We have relationships with these folks, and we use them to try to define the questions that should be asked, and therefore the things that FSOP or whatever the grants are that covers. And then similarly, she was really clear that she takes report data and processes it and sends it through to policymakers. And so that's a huge opportunity. I mean, especially if there's a way to do what I think, Nicole, you're doing and what you guys are talking about at this table to harmonize these data collection and use it in some effortful way in the reporting process, then that is a huge way to leverage the conversation, right? And to demonstrate a collective need. And that it takes a little work because then you have to think about it before reporting comes, and then we're all exhausted. But it's an opportunity. Okay, cool. Anybody else want to tack anything on there? All right, let's move into threats. I know this is what everyone's been waiting for, right? Okay, so remember, these are external things you do not have control over, that impact your ability to meet the goal of getting folks to file these attestations. Okay, we are going to do our report back. So before we do our report back, Julia, I'm going to give you a warning that we moved your sheet over there. Your weaknesses is over there now. Before we do a report back on threats, what I would like to do is a quick cleanup round, because as we know, other things come up, right? So we've already done strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. While talking about threats, opportunities, and weaknesses, you may have come up with another strength, right? While talking about opportunities and threats, you might have come up with another weakness. So let's just do a quick cleanup. Is there anything that you guys uncovered in subsequent conversations that didn't make it up to strengths? Nothing? Cool. What about weaknesses? Ixnay. Oh, yes, ma'am. A weakness that didn't make it up. Oh, she's coming with your mic.
We said lack of resources.
Okay. I think someone has that up there. Anything else that we want to put up there as weaknesses? Okay, opportunities.
We have an extra opportunity. We said, what was it? Communicating the benefits of food safety, or better communicating the benefits of food safety.
Okay, great.
As an opportunity.
Okay, let's go ahead with our threats. Kathy, do you want to start off? Annie, do you want to?
Yes,
sorry. That's all right. It's hard now that, especially we're all over.
So our threats were money being cut off.
So the potential of it happening, or it happening right now?
Potential of it
Okay,
happening.
potential for money to be cut off.
Yeah, and then the potential of politics and regulations going away due to politicians wanting likability.
Okay.
Or their interference in regulations because of their wanting the votes. The uncertainty of FDA regulation planning at the moment with the changes that may be taking place, followed by the lack of accountability from the government.
Tell me more about that.
What happens if you don't even register as an FDA facility if you're a small? What's the chance of a FDA inspector turning up to a small processor?
So I would call that, from my economist view, you don't have to say it this way, but I'm just saying because I spoke about it like this earlier, I would call that a lack of enforcement, or unclear enforcement.
Okay. And then the other one was the cannabis not being established for food work, with really weak regulations over the cannabis edibles.
Yeah, say that again. That kind of came out. I'm sure that's something you guys will talk about. It came out of left field for me. Say it again.
So the cannabis regulations are left to the state because it's not allowed to be a food regulation.
Okay.
I mean, it's not allowed to be a federal.
So for processed cannabis products, there isn't a federal. It's unclear what the federal guidelines are.
Well, there aren't federal guidelines.
There aren't any federal guidelines
because it's illegal federally still. Unwillingness to change. So, everyone?
Nailed it.
And then another public health crisis / climate change / supply chain.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you have a preference?
No,
okay,
no.
Either
I
table?
think Kate and Andrea's group is in the rotational stage, to the extent there is one.
Thanks. All right. A lot of our threats seem to center on the twin issues of money and time. So, limited money and time can lead to burnout, both for people on the food safety team, and then that can also cause people to leave, which contributes to the high turnover. Our short-term funding model, where you have projects and then you have to go to the next project, that lack of long-term security often causes people to leave. Like what Kathy said, regulators not being consistent with what an educator feels is important in the regulation. So if somebody's like, no, you need to do this, and this, and then when the inspector comes in, they're like, oh, who cares? That can be a bit of a problem. Competing regulations, such as the state wholesale licensing program in Massachusetts, also related to money and time. You have to decide whether or not you want to do one-on-one events versus group workshops and training. So sort of like the friction between the two. And funding, political funding games are becoming a bit of an issue again. And then the last one was intentional bad behavior by the firm. Jeffrey gave an example of a firm that falsified a C of A. And also if the firm is trying to not find the problem, they're doing everything to not find the hazards in their plant so that they don't have to report on that.
So sort of good faith, like lack of good faith kind of. Okay. That's great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So a few things people have already said, like unforeseen reductions in federal funding or changes in federal funding for extension food safety work. We also added declining support for extension programs within universities, competition for resources. Of course, we are all competing for the same resources, and so then there's the opportunity of expanding collaborations. Let's see, urgent educational and technical assistance needs, and so that basically means sometimes as we work at universities or we cannot really respond that quickly to what industry needs, so they might go somewhere else. Let's see. Yes, sorry. The what? Which one? Oh, competing for the same resources, and then urgent educational and technical assistance needs that industry may have. Yep. We also talked about misinformation on social media, right? And so how all of those things that are circulating in social media are a threat to actual good food safety practices.
Yeah, that's a good
Could
idea.
be, yeah. That
Put
is a good
social media
idea.
and opportunity. Yeah. Maybe do you want to do that? Just add social media as an opportunity so we have it. Is it there already? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and then other things related to extension, like poor retention of people in extension.
Do you mean
like extension associates, right? So there's fewer and fewer young people want to go into extension.
Okay.
Lots of extension people that want to work in rural places, things like that. We also you hit the ceiling, and it's hard to go up from there. We also discussed emerging types of food commerce, such as online commerce, home deliveries, things like that, and the challenges that those things present for food safety.
And also lack of regulations.
Lack of regulations in that space. Yeah.
Right.
There's no regulations. There's
Yeah.
So even though there's the new regulations.
Did
Sorry,
you guys
what'd you
get
say?
most everything? These are my notes. Yeah. All right, I think that's all we have.
Okay. Can I ask a question for those? Oh, sorry, Luke, go ahead.
Seems like we drifted here because the question was about file attestations, and we just stopped at how do you increase the number of processors that are aware of the regulations.
I'm okay with that.
Attestation is one aspect of that, but we opened a can of worms to everything.
We sure did. I feel like that's just an inevitability with this group. This is a can opening group, which is why I love it. But that's okay, because I think we all acknowledge that it's like these are in some ways sequential steps, right? Like they all are related to each other. I just want to ask a question. Are those of you who are at land grants, do you guys get hatch money for your work or not? You do? Does everyone or just some of you get it? So hatch money is federal money that flows through ag experiment stations. And so your ag experiment station director has to make a choice to let you access the money, and it can be used for grad students, it can be used for research, it can be used for stuff that you can't get covered by grants and isn't covered by pre-existing line items. But in my experience, there's a certain amount of, there are discrepancies about how ag experiment station directors see what that money is supposed to be used for and what it isn't. So I'm just going to put that as a threat, that there isn't a clear, yeah, go ahead, Byron. Oh. Are you leaving? Or are you okay?
So in our last multi-state meeting, we talked about that,
Okay.
and every university basically handles that differently, right?
Yeah.
Because they're experiment directors or whatever. At Nebraska, we do get funding through Hatch. Like they pay for my multi-state meetings every year, and I also have a fully funded PhD student that it's paid by Hatch.
Okay, so I think that's really, I'm going to put it as a threat for now, that there isn't clear guidance that ag experiment station directors can access that money for food safety. Never tell any of my econ people I said that, because it's taken away from their money. So please never say that out loud. Yeah, well, so we'll talk about this in a second. All right, and I also just want to say, you guys talked about how the FDA doesn't enforce. I think we also need to put as a threat that FDA doesn't share information. And I'm just going to build on what Andrea said, which is, and what you guys are talking about with the cannabis stuff, which is that there's just a patchwork of state, county, and even regional and municipal regulations, right? And it's really hard to navigate. So if those can go up in threats too. Okay, here's what we're going to do now. We're all going to stand up, okay? We're going to move over here. Pavana, can you take the threats and put it in that empty spot? What we're going to do is we are going to see, first with weaknesses, then with threats if we get to it, how we can try to pivot the weaknesses into strengths, what it would take, all right? So it's a little bit of how we shift our minds, but it's also a little bit of prioritizing resources. So let's all move over so we can actually see the thing.
Wow. What a time to visit.
I know. It's a signature.
Okay, so what we're trying to do here is think about. I feel like half of us are old enough to remember Star Search. This is always what I feel like when somebody gives me a mic, like I'm supposed to have jazz hands. All right. So what we're trying to do, and actually, Julie, I think unfortunately you're blocking it for most, even though it's too small to read anyway. So what we're trying to do is think of how we can turn weaknesses that we've identified into strengths, all right? So the way this is going to, and a lot of this is sort of there are overlaps between the way that different groups report it out, right? So we're going to try a little bit to condense to the extent that we can on the fly. This is why we had an hour for lunch where we had already done this, so I could spend more time thinking it through. Okay, so I think the first thing that I'm going to pull out here are the communication things. So we have this one piece about overcomplication, critical thinking, right? So coming from a sort of a science-based perspective, when you go in, it becomes, maybe your brain is firing on some different pistons than the people you're talking to, and they're not quite picking up what you're putting down. This risk-based language, somebody tell me again what that means. I knew what it meant when you said it, but now I can't remember. It's the same.
No, I think that was me. The fact that you can't really say something is zero risk or guaranteed safe.
I see. So that's, again, a science, translating what it means, the science of what you're doing to what a person understands. Because they don't want to hear, you're never going to be perfect, right? Like, none of us want to hear that, honestly. I say that out loud, and I'm like, oh, no. It depends, yeah. All right, so some kind of so there's something there in the framing, perhaps, that can be addressed. So difficulty to communicate, and we added in here sort of different contexts. So part of it is the difficulty to communicate to the processors themselves, but some of it is the communication with the policymakers, and some of it is communication with potential non-food safety collaborators, right? So thinking about the way that your language and your tools translate or fail to translate, I think is kind of the theme we're coming through here with. So vocabulary issue. They don't know what they need, or they don't know what they don't know. Okay. So does anyone want to take a stab at translating that into some strengths? Let's put strengths up here. I'm going to spell it wrong. Oh, God. G-T. Oh, and it even fits. Look at that. That's amazing. All right. Who wants to take a stab at that? I'm going to call on people. Okay. And so how can you take that weakness with the strength? What can you do to that weakness? All right. Shall I give you a suggestion? Okay. So you can it could be an issue of prioritizing resources, your time being primary among them, to find people, right, that can help you do the translation. Or just spending, I honestly think that most of you could do the translation if you had time to do it, right?
I mean, I'm having a little bit of difficulty translating weaknesses into strengths because I see more weaknesses into opportunities.
Okay. That's okay. Yeah, that's totally fine. We can put it in opportunities. It's all right. I mean, because you're saying it's more of like a potential than a base. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think for me, maybe what Luke is saying is the opportunity finding other people. But what the other conversation about you guys have the capacity, it's not like you don't know how to do it. It's that you don't have time to do it, right? So that might be a strength.
Still another example of us really preferring to use the words we like to use, to be honest.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Do we want to put it under opportunity? I'm cool with that. I can handle it. All right. So how can we frame it? Can you take a stab, Byron? At
I don't remember which one.
Yeah.
So under overcomplication, I think that we can simplify our solutions
Okay.
that we offer.
Yes.
I think more examples,
Mm-hmm.
more applicable examples,
Mm-hmm.
that might be drifting from overcomplication.
Oh, I think that also links to the limited experience, right? And someone, I think it was Ellen said at the beginning, we have all this knowledge, right? So what can we do to marry the knowledge with the limited experience? And that is through things like case studies. That is through giving harder examples and not over-tooling from an educator academic perspective, but putting on your experiential learning hat.
And so one thing I'm going to say, because we don't have a lot of time, is that you guys, and this kind of goes to what I was saying before about the, helping NEFA define priorities. You guys are in the position of defining stuff if you want to, right? You can make definitions. You can, as an industry group, you can come up with a definition of something that FDA has failed to define clearly. And you can say what it is and use it consistently among yourselves and have it be a thing. So this whole issue with who are these people? Are they small and medium processors? Are they qualified? I mean, they have no idea if they're qualified exempt, right? They don't know. That does not mean anything to them. But you have the power to come up with a way that they can identify themselves that meets the need to try to connect them to what they need in terms of how to go through this process, right? So I think that that's an opportunity that you guys have too. I don't know how to write these down. Does anyone want to do the bullet points? Where's Kathy? Yeah, Kathy, bullet point us up, please. It doesn't really matter. Whatever you want. So just simplify. Simplify language.
Simplify language, simplify message,
Okay?
and then simplify solutions.
Okay.
And then harmonize.
Simplify and harmonize.
Is more than what they actually have to do.
Yeah. Okay.
Emphasize prioritizing.
All right. So
Have to do everything.
help them prioritize.
Do the most important thing.
So define for them how they prioritize. Simplify, define, harmonize. Simplify, define, harmonize. Language. Opportunity. Simplify, define, harmonize. I really like that. So what resources would you need to do that? Time.
I think sometimes maybe, we're educators would not train, or at least I'm not trained in risk communication, right? So if we do that, more training on how to communicate risk, we could potentially simplify the design.
Okay. So what you're saying is that as a resource that you need in order to do the simplification is access to experts who can understand it. Experts in risk communication. Instructional design. Oh, hold on a second. Too many people. I know. You know what? We're going to just pretend that these strengths, threats, opportunities, just write something on a piece of paper, and we'll figure it out on the back end. Yeah. Okay, so I just want to make sure that they are getting this down before we move on. So simplify, harmonize, there's something in the middle, define. Simplify and define, harmonize. I said it like 4 times, I still couldn't do it. And then you're saying find experts. Okay. Risk communication. I think given these other bullets that we're going to get to next, there are other experts too, right?
Risk communication,
Adult learning, behavior change, instructional design. Just start writing this stuff if it's duplicate. All right, but Kath, sorry, go ahead.
We don't need these people. We need to talk to our clients, to look at our material and tell us what they don't understand.
Okay. Client input. So why would your clients want to do that? Why would your clients want to take their time to do that for you? So what resource? Okay, so you'd have to find the money to pay them for that input. Okay, absolutely. So compensation for client input. Okay.
Yeah, like whenever I do an initial training and do a beta,
Mm-hmm.
it's always super cheap.
Yeah.
But I would preface with, okay, this is the first pancake that gets thrown away. If you guys do this.
You know, as the mom, I eat the first pancake.
But you know what? But,
But I hear you.
that really
I'm the trash can.
to give you feedback.
Okay.
They know.
Yeah.
That this is the beta.
That's 100%. So structuring program development to allow for input. That's another time, though, right? You guys have to have time to do that. There was something you were going to say, Byron. No. Wasn't there? And we shushed you because there was a stack? Okay.
You said stakeholder input, and we got that. So
Okay. Okay. This is great. All right. So let's see. What time is it? How are we doing?
So we've got 20 minutes.
Oh, okay, great. What about lack of optimistic listening?
Is that optimistic listening of the educator or of the small baby process?
I was understanding it as the educator because the weakness is supposed to be about the educator, but maybe that's not what people meant. Okay, but still, yeah, seriously. So, but still, how do you guys, what do you feel like is causing that, and how do you feel like you guys can translate that into something that's a strength or an opportunity? Go for it, Annie. Come on.
Sorry,
You're so good at this. So.
I sometimes will lump my processors together to say that the shortcomings of one are the shortcomings of all. So I think it's a matter of ensuring that I look at each processor where they're at and not assuming that they have sort of the same challenges and the same shortcomings as others.
And so what do you think is contributing to that sort of shorthand that you're doing?
I think you do hear the same problems over and over,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that you can just sort of take a shortcut and assume you have the answer.
Okay.
You have several consistent data points, but that's not, correlation is not causation.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, go ahead, Kathy. Does anyone else want to take a stab at this one? Have we come up with an opportunity or strength?
Outside office hours or something that's a support tool outside of the classroom so you can get through the content, but you're still providing that support outside of that.
So sort of structure, so think about what's sort of leading to that pressure and try to find a different structure that gives more opportunity for individual. Yeah, okay.
Basically, kind of a couple of ideas here, but intentional assessment of that client entry point.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to harmonizing, having a similar set of questions that we're all asking to assess that point.
So like a common intake tool. Do you feel like that is you guys? How would you say? How would you call it? Is it?
We were talking about contact points because these different processors come into us at different points. Their access points are different. So if you're an entrepreneur with a concept versus they already sold stuff, but they have a half-ass prototype, but they're already committed to selling it, the triage work is different.
So is this an opportunity to come up with some sort of like rubric to place people within where they are in the stage?
We were talking about earlier was harmonizing language and also thinking about entry points about what resources would help onboard them faster. So as an example, we have 3 different resources that we know in Massachusetts you can use, but depending on where you are, you find them in different places. It actually is a tool we don't have in the resource tool because it's a concept development, so it's in business development for MDAR. It's not in food safety. But it depends on where you are on the spectrum of the food system, and we don't have that, so that it's hard to find the things.
So and I would even say that goes back to the earlier issue of definition, right? So this is an opportunity not just to come up with a tool that you can use, but to come up with language to explain that to people quickly, right? To say there are stages of business development for food processors, and here are the stages. And, it's like a kid's developmental stage, right? Like, are they reading by the time they're in first grade or not, right? Like, where is your business relative to these benchmarks?
And if I could summarize that, maybe
Please.
better assess the client's needs, or better assess the SMP's needs, so then you can tailor your approach better. Maybe not totally rewrite your training, but maybe you use better examples. Maybe you use different language, depending if they're an entrepreneur or they're a... Yeah, but if you know their entry point, then the portfolio resources are different. Because they better understand their entry point /needs.
Okay. And so coming up with something consistent that you guys all agree to, more or less, because and then that way, the way that resources are organized can be easier to find for everyone. All right. Great.
Not only organized, but the order in which they're presented.
Right. Okay. So that actually, sorry, that's right. So you already had that as food safety is not part of business planning. So I think what we just talked about goes under that, right? Yeah?
Well, I think incorporating little non-food safety, but value-added items into the training, and I think that would help you from a legitimacy standpoint. I think it would make
What do you mean when you say value added in that context?
Well, I'm talking about business development.
Oh, okay. Like value proposition, value added.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking like a physical change in state of a product from raw to processed as value added. So I was just like, oh. Yeah.
This is the question of how do we make the behavior
Mm-hmm.
putting more value-added content into our trainings.
Okay.
Not just saying, here are the regulations, here's what we think you need to do to satisfy that regulation, but hey, here's what you can do to help you here and help you in other ways.
So here's an analogy. When I started teaching, I have experimental economists in my department, and one of the things that an experimental economist does is they try to set up a scientific experiment, but with people. So they are very rigorous about the way that they wear. If they have to do like 17 sessions, they'll do them at the same time every day. They'll offer the exact same snacks. They'll wear the same thing. They'll do their hair the same way. They're trying to control all the variables, right, so that they're not influencing in some way the people's behavior in the room. So these people think a lot about priming responses. So one of the first things that one of these people told me when I started teaching was prime your students to give you good evaluations by telling them the answers to the questions you're going to ask them when the evaluations come around. Tell them that you're this and that and the other thing. So the reason I'm saying that is because to a certain extent, you want to tell them what the value is before they even start. And then remind them as you go through what the value is, so that at the end of it, not only do they have the food safety knowledge and whatever technical information they need, but they understand why it was important.
Yeah, and that's one of the opportunities that we had was better communicate food safety, the value of food safety,
Right.
benefits.
Okay.
And so I think that that's an opportunity.
Yeah, totally. Sorry for that, for that little story, but yes. So explain why it matters. Yeah. Early and often. All right, let's talk about turnover. So part of it, what I hear in the groups is turnover is a problem in terms of experts in the industry. But I also hear there aren't a lot of opportunities for new people coming in, which doesn't necessarily seem, from my perspective, that seems maybe a little inconsistent. So I'm just wondering what that means and how, what is it that you think either doesn't bring people in? Is it because there aren't opportunities to start with, or because people there aren't enough opportunities in general? I mean, I think one thing that I take away from this is that there just aren't enough of you guys doing this work. I mean, if you are here in the Northeast, like this isn't that many people considering how many businesses there are in the Northeast. So I guess just what is it that you think you can do? What is it that is an opportunity or a strength that you have to deal with the issue of expertise within your field that would help you reach more people, reach more businesses? Mm-hmm. That's excellent. So that's a money issue, right? That's a resources issue, but it's also a time issue because you have to supervise those folks. Yeah. 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 Yeah, go ahead.
Possibly bringing that legal extension closer to private businesses.
Okay.
Like just to use it as
Mm-hmm.
examples because the laboratory background and the years of training and the data that goes through, I do a lot of working with people that are really
Mm-hmm.
very expertise in data processes and things like that, as well as myself, as far as limited issues. But I've never had them contact me.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they don't want to. And in the event when there was a project, if there were issues where I
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's one thing I think Amanda and I have tried to do, and I think other folks in here is like reaching out, I mean, you know, with the food safety folks in our region to try to bring people in and find funding for them through, you know, when we apply for grants. And it's hard. I mean, I'm just going to say working at a university and trying to do that is. Yeah, that's a good point. Right. Okay. Thank you for saying that. I think a lot of people do like to get a little money for it, but that's a good point. All right, so doing more to reach out to people who are outside of academia and try and help build the knowledge base there, but also tap into the knowledge base that exists there, right? Okay.
And I think that is glean best practices.
Mm-hmm. Like give me an example.
Well, you know, like, I don't know, somebody's been talking about the insurance industry and how good they are at benefits and leveraging that communication.
Okay. So trying to find people who are, so from that's risk management. I also think that a certain amount of, like when we talk about policymakers and regulators, like they want numbers about impact. They want numbers about, you know, economic impact. They want to see like what moves the needle and what doesn't, like, and where. So trying to think about how to communicate that and finding people in other industries that can help communicate that.
And I think that the best practices thing is really across the board. I mean, you could look at your weaknesses, look at your opportunities, and then find somebody else that's doing a better job than you.
Right.
And go to them and get the best practices. How did you do
Yeah.
that? What did you do?
Okay. Do we feel like we've captured that? Yeah.
About avoiding burnout, like we have to hold each other accountable for not working so much.
Totally.
We have to make sure our coworkers go home and take their vacation.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. That actually, there's something in here. Right, overextended. That was, thank you. Because that was, when we got to overextended, that was going to, so. 5-minute mark. All right, do you want to talk about overextended? Actually, I think siloing. Let's do that, because I think you nailed it. Overextended, you nailed it. Siloing territorialism. 5 minutes. Does anyone want to take a stab at how to translate that from a weakness into an opportunity or a strength? Yes, ma'am.
I think the FDA likes to see when we do collaborate and sort of build these networks, especially with underserved partners.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can get better at selling that message, that we don't have to, you know, be territorial about every project because we can use it as a selling point that we're collaborating, it could become a way to leverage that.
Okay, so you're saying.
Counter siloing by selling our networking capabilities.
Okay, so.
Maximize the capacity.
Right. So you're basically saying, like, I mean, you know, you guys say you're siloed, and I believe you. I also see you every year talking to each other. So, you know, there's a certain amount that you're doing that maybe is better than what you realize about yourselves. Yeah.
I think that to that point, maybe one of the problems is that, you know, we obviously collaborate, right? We have grants with people in different regions and whatnot, but at the end of the day, when you go out for promotion and tenure, you will always be asked, what did you do? What was your contribution, right? So, yeah, we need to make sure that we collaborate and have things together, but we also have to show that we do something for ourselves and we develop that program, something like that. And I think that siloing or that territorialism comes from the fact that when we get evaluated, the collaborations may not be.
They're not valued as much if they're just, yeah.
The one thing that you did by yourself.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And that's actually a conversation that a group of regional economists and sociologists have been talking about in the world of academia, is trying to come up with ways to push administrators to value and measure interdisciplinary work. especially as these grants, I mean, these large grants are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you have to be interdisciplinary, but it's a lot of work, and you don't necessarily get credit for the work that goes into doing that. And so helping administrators understand that and giving them some definitions around that, there are a handful of organizations that, and smaller groups that are sort of working through that, and it might be worthwhile for folks in this group to push with their administrations as well. Well, I'm a research professor, so as long as I pay for myself, nobody cares. It is fascinating. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Rather than it just being like, oh, I know that this subject matter expert from XYZ state has this background, let me try to collaborate with them.
Right.
Less apt to do that if they don't know you.
Yeah, totally. Kathy, go ahead. 2 minutes. Yes. Well, actually, so can we translate that to a strength, something we can do? Because, and let me just give, because we don't have that much more time, I think one thing that this group could do that would be relatively low lift is just ask the collaborators and non-academics, the nonprofits and other folks that are adjacent, you know, what is your willingness to be a part of one of these bigger projects? Are you interested? Are you not interested? What can you offer? What do you need? Right? And just doing like a survey once every few years and trying to keep it up in a relative sense, and then making that public to the, well, not public, but, you know, available to the group, right? And so part of it is just education for people who are writing grants that this is out there, and part of it is hopefully, you know, making more of those connections. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, one way to get out, to break out of that territorialism and the silo problem is to use and contribute to tools like the human process toolkit,
Mm-hmm.
because that's open sharing of information.
Excellent. Jeffrey, last word.
I was just going to say, we brought up several times in the last few points about collaboration. And what I mentioned at our table was, you know, I know a little bit now about the people that were at the table, but it's not like I took notes. But everybody else here, I have no idea what their background or what they know or who I can even contact or what.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it would be worthwhile maybe for this association to come up with the people that attended, where they come from, what they do, and what some of their background is. Because some of the expertise in places people work is helpful to understand if they're going to be helpful in a situation for other people.
That's a great idea. I've been to a couple of things recently where when you register, you write a 4-page bio, right? Did you guys do that? Yeah. I did, actually, yeah. And it's just in the Google form, right? And then you just put it in a something people can access. Yeah. All right. I think we're at time. This is really great. I hope you guys felt like this is interesting. It seemed like people were pretty engaged. We are going to do our best to get this written up quickly. And then we are going to send out a call to everybody who's in this group, at least, and ask for your help in identifying some processors we can talk to, you know, obviously consolidate this conversation dramatically, but give them something that they can reflect back to us on and sort of help us understand if they see it from this perspective or not, or if they can add anything that we're missing. And then we are going to start working on developing our social sciences tool and fielding that, and there will be more information than you probably want to know about that at some point. Uh-oh. Everybody's...
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can thank you afterwards, but Tricia and I have been talking about
Those types of things of onboarding people using the same language at starting points, and then using things that we use, right? So before you do consults for developers in particular, you come with a product description, a process flow diagram, and a process flow description, and then I will talk to you because you've already come to the table, so that the communications. So the point being, this is one example of tools that we're trying to find ways that I can educate people like Tricia of basic fundamentals of language that we use, but using the same tools. If I train her and people like her who I would consider a food safety communicator, you're an expert like we are in the PC rule, but you know this is important. How do we work with organizational partners for on-ramping to be more consistent? Yes, that's exactly what we actually used that word before. So, yes. So we can then, by establishing a modality that has multiple points of entry, but we're all using the same type of language, hopefully the outreach efforts would be more consistent so that if and or when they come to a lab or a process authority, we're not fighting about, do you need a scheduled process, because they already know the language, because the triage was done up front to know I'm dealing with a heart attack versus I need stitches. So trying to find that path, but I agree.
All right, so, dang it. There's something I was going to say that got sucked out of my brain. One thing that a lot of associations do, I feel like NECAPS is old enough for this now to do this, is give awards and honors, right? Like to demonstrate how longstanding members of the community are valued. And in terms of like the turnover and professional development and communicating who's doing what to whom, that might be something to consider too. And so that, I think that's it. We're good, right? Woohoo! Thanks, guys.